Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this bulletin with our top story, and that's in Palestine, where 8 more Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Palestine's health ministry says Tel Aviv's airstrikes and shelling have killed 22 Palestinians in the past 24 hours. Witnesses say Tel Aviv has also started amassing troops along the Gaza border. In a statement, the Palestinian government said Israel has hit Gaza with 22 airstrikes and 10 artillery shells since Tuesday. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh has told Israel to immediately stop its aggression against Gaza, accusing Israeli politicians of using the conflict to end the ongoing political deadlock. He said Palestine Bud is being used as an electoral card. Now, 7 people have been killed and 7 others wounded in a car bomb explosion near the Interior Ministry in the Afghan capital, Kabul. Interior Ministry spokesperson Nusrat Rahimi says the blast occurred in Kabul's Kasaba area. The spokesperson said the targeted area has not yet been cleared. Witnesses say the blast also damaged vehicles in the area, but no one has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. Well, staying with Afghanistan, and recounting votes in the Afghan presidential election has been stopped across the country. The preliminary results that had been due tomorrow have been further delayed. Election Commission spokesman Aziz Ahmed Ibrahimi said the process has been stopped to address complaints by candidates. He said owing to the issues in the recounting process at 8,000 polling stations, the final result must be delayed. His comments came after Afghanistan's chief executive Abdullah passed his reservations to the US envoy to Kabul, John Bass. 10 out of 18 presidential candidates, including Abdullah, have boycotted the recount. They've demanded the removal of fraudulent votes before any moving on with the process. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the country's economy is slowly but steadily strengthening. Speaking at a CPEC project signing ceremony in Islamabad, Khan said the World Bank, the IMF and the ADB have recognized Pakistan's progress. The Prime Minister said the rupee has become stronger in the last 3 months, which is a good sign for Pakistan's economy. He said the government is trying to reduce trade deficit because this is the only way forward. Khan said Pakistan's ease of doing business has jumped 28 points, showing the current government's performance. Now, the head of the Indian-occupied Kashmir's Hurriyat Conference, Saeed Ali Gilani, has thanked Pakistan for bringing global attention to the crisis in Kashmir. In a letter to Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, Gilani said this may be his last public statement because of his worsening health. Gilani said Imran Khan's speech at the UN General Assembly for the oppressed people of occupied Kashmir was praiseworthy. He said the Indian occupation forces are using rape and other forms of sexual violence to subjugate Kashmiris. He said Indian troops are now grabbing Kashmiris' lands, following Israel's example. Gilani said the Muslims of Ladakh have also been left at the mercy of brutal Indian forces because they rejected New Delhi's annexation of the valley. He urged PM Khan to take action and end all diplomatic ties and agreements with India after its illegal actions. Well, just coming in now, it seems in Pakistan, the government has granted a one-time approval to let former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif abroad for 4 weeks for urgent medical treatment. It says the Minister of Law and Justice Farooq Naseem said the permission will be subject to the submission of an indemnity bond of 7 billion rupees to travel to the UK. The cabinet meeting, chaired by Prime Minister Khan, approved the removal of Sharif's name from the exit control list. Well, further gagging of press freedom in India has denied internet access to international journalists reporting from occupied Kashmir. The authorities have banned freelancers and web journalists from the Srinagar Media Centre. The media centre is the only place where journalists have internet access amid a total communications blackout in the valley. Journalists say they have to stand in queues for hours for a chance to file their stories. Journalist Akash Hassan said he is leaving the centre, calling this development another humiliation for local journalists. Yesterday, journalists held a protest against the Indian-imposed clampdown and communication blackout, which has been in effect for the past 100 days. In Washington, a US Congress meeting is set to hold a hearing on the crisis in Indian-occupied Kashmir tomorrow. In a statement, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission said there are persistent reports of human rights violations in the valley. The Commission expressed concern at the excessive use of force by occupation forces, the communications blackout and legal arrests of Kashmiri politicians, and it said witnesses will testify about the human rights situation and will offer recommendations for action by Congress. The witnesses will include human rights activist Arjun Sethi, Sela Asai, Human Rights Watch official John Sifton, and Ohio University professor Haley Duchinsky. The hearing will be hosted by Congressman James McGovern and Christopher Smith. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has arrived in Washington for a two-day visit to meet US President Donald Trump. Erdogan says Turkey's military operation in northern Syria will be on the top of the meeting's agenda. Ahead of his visit, Erdogan accused Washington of not fulfilling its commitment of vacating Kurdish forces from areas bordering Turkey. Meanwhile, Trump has not expressed any intention of ending Washington's alliance with the SDF. Last month, President Trump pulled back US troops from northeast Syria, parting ways with the Kurdish forces. But he later joined forces with the SDF to guard Syrian oil installations from falling into ISIS's hands. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent Harry Horton from Washington. Harry, thank you for joining us here on Indus News. So tell us, look, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visit comes a month after Ankara's military offensive in northeast Syria. Can he convince President Donald Trump to abandon the US relationship with the YPG and the SDF, as that seems the main sticking point between the two countries?
It's fair to say that the US-Turkey relationship is at its lowest point in decades, and it's just that personal bond, really, between President Trump and President Erdogan that's keeping things together somewhat. That point of whether or not the US will abandon its allies, the SDF, YPG, in northeastern Syria, I think that's pretty unlikely. A senior White House official speaking to reporters just a few hours ago said that there is no intention for that cooperation to end. The president has had very public communications with the head of the SDF, General Mazloum. So President Erdogan, I'm sure, will come here and try and pressure President Trump to back away from its alliance with the Kurds in northeastern Syria. But as far as the White House is concerned, that alliance, although it is not quite at the level it was some months ago, it does remain. And I think the priority is for the United States to keep that alliance in place for the months ahead.
All right, Harry, last month, US Congress passed a sanctions package against Turkey over its Syria operation. Do you think President Erdogan and Trump can work out a way to evade further sanctions on the country?
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult because there's a whole range of different issues, as I say, that the US and Turkey are at odds over. One of the biggest ones is the Russian S-400 missile defense system. Turkey has spent billions and billions of dollars purchasing this Russian missile defense system. That's really angered lawmakers here in Washington, D.C. So the US is trying to get Turkey to back away from that system it's just invested in. That's a very difficult thing for the US to do, but one senior White House official said recently that if Turkey doesn't do that, then it's inevitable that Turkey will be hit with further economic sanctions. So that's something that could be coming down the line in the weeks ahead. Other issues where there's huge disagreements, as we've just talked about, the not just the US alliance with the SDF and the YPG, but the overall strategy that the US has for Syria going forward. Very different to what Turkey wants to happen with Syria in the future. Big disagreements as well on human human rights in Turkey as well. Lots of US lawmakers putting pressure on President Trump to do more to try and protect human rights within Turkey. So huge areas of disagreement here. The White House have been playing down expectations over the past few days that we could see any sort of a big deal or big announcement come out of this meeting between President Erdogan and President Trump. The White House trying to say, look, this is just about diplomacy, this is trying to smooth things over somewhat, and then perhaps in the weeks and months ahead, the two countries might be able to thrash out some more concrete agreements. So look, the relationship in a very bad place going into this meeting between President Trump and President Erdogan, and I think really both countries hoping they can come out with a slightly calmer tone between the two countries and then try and resolve those bigger issues going forward.
Harry, thank you for joining us in Indus News. That was our correspondent Harry Horton in Washington talking about the summit between President Erdogan of Turkey and US President Donald Trump. And we'll be bringing you further details on that story as it develops right here live on Indus News. Now, moving on to the other news, Iraq has indefinitely postponed all provincial council elections without citing any reasons. This came after the US called on Baghdad to stop using violence against protesters and hold early elections. Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi's media office said the decision was taken by the cabinet. Iraq's High Commission for Human Rights says over 300 protesters have been killed in anti-government demonstrations. Mahdi has refused to step down but has called for major electoral and constitutional reforms to address public grievances. A protester has been shot dead and another injured in Beirut after the army fired live rounds to disperse an anti-corruption protest. It's the second death during the ongoing nationwide unrest that has largely been peaceful. The army says it arrested a soldier who opened fire at demonstrators in the coastal town of Khalde. The Walid Jumblat-led Progressive Socialist Party said the victim is one of its members, but urged supporters to stay calm. Earlier, Lebanese President Michel Aoun proposed a government comprising technocrats and politicians. The UN has urged Lebanon to accelerate the formation of a new government. Well, Hong Kong's police say the island city is on the brink of a total breakdown. They say protesters are committing what they call insane acts. Authorities say rioters have set up roadblocks and are destroying public transport facilities. The Education Bureau has shut down schools with transport paralysed and growing safety concerns amid violent protests. Announcing the suspension, Hong Kong's Education Bureau also urged protesters to stop violent acts. But anti-government protesters have pledged to stick with their new strategy of weekday violence. The hospital authority says 81 people have been injured in the last 24 hours for the third straight day. The city is witnessing its worst violence in over 5 months of protests. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now in India, New Delhi's air quality has moved into the severe plus category. The Central Pollution Control Board has indicated an emergency, declaring pollution at over 500 on the Air Quality Index. India and New Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world. More in this report.
People are suffering from respiratory diseases as a thick blanket of smog continues to engulf the Indian capital. New Delhi and its adjoining cities have been grappling with their worst ever pollution crisis. Residents are complaining of runny eyes, a persistent cough, and dull headaches that last all day.
There is a lot of trouble. Eyes burning and even walking is difficult these days. There is a long-term loss of health with it.
Absent winds are said to be one of the reasons for the increasing pollution over the last 2 days, other than stubble burning. Particulate matter levels have been recorded at 500, nearly 5 times the healthy limit. A Delhi resident said breathing felt forced.
When we breathe, it feels like forced breathing. So we have to get out wearing masks in both mornings and evenings.
Air quality in the hazardous or equivalent category may provoke respiratory issues that can affect even healthy individuals.
It feels dizzy and nauseating. Children and elderly are especially having respiratory issues. Infections are also coming forward with the pollution.
The air quality in India's capital is expected to deteriorate further in the coming days.
In Australia, more than 70 fires are still burning across New South Wales and 61 in Queensland. Conditions have eased from the catastrophic danger ratings in NSW earlier, but Queensland's situation has gotten worse.
The hot, dry continent of Australia has long experience with bushfires. But scientists say climate change is magnifying extreme weather conditions. The threat in New South Wales has been downgraded from catastrophic, but officials urge residents to remain vigilant. 21 people have been injured in New South Wales. 13 of these are firefighters. Officials say 50 houses have been destroyed or damaged in the state. At one point, fires broke out in the suburbs of Sydney. Further north, Queensland is expected to face dangerous wind changes today. 14 homes have been destroyed, 13 in the Cobra Ball fire near Yeppoon. Meanwhile, the waterbombing helicopter crashed in the northern state. The Queensland Ambulance Service is calling it a heavy landing and says the pilot has minor injuries.
Well, smog in India, fires in Australia and now floods in Great Britain, where British Prime Minister has announced more support for communities affected by flooding in northern England. 100 army personnel will be deployed to support recovery efforts in South Yorkshire. Boris Johnson made the commitment following a meeting of the government's Emergency Cobra Committee. Johnson faced criticism from Labour and the Liberal Democrats, who said he should declare a national emergency. Over a month's worth of rain fell on parts of northern England in less than 24 hours last week. It prompted flooding that killed a woman who was swept away and forced some people to leave their homes. Well, Venice has also been hit by the second highest tide in its recorded history. Seasonal high tides, dubbed Acqua Alta, are just 7 centimetres short of the record flood level of 1966. Authorities say the tide peaked at 187 centimetres around 11 p.m. local time. Venice's historic St. Mark's Basilica, public squares and alleyways are currently all underwater. Mayor Luigi Brugnaro says he will declare a state of emergency and asked Rome for help. Brugnaro also said the tide is a result of climate change. Flooding in Venice during this season is normal, but recent trends highlight an abnormal rise in sea levels. Well, the sea off the coast of Mexico is losing its coral at an alarming rate to a little understood disease. More than 30% of the coastline's coral has been lost in less than a year. Scientists are trying to figure out what causes the disease. More in this report.
With its turquoise sea, white sand beaches and breathtaking reds, yellows and purples of the Mesoamerican reef, the Mexican Caribbean is like no other tourist spot in the world. But these beautiful sights are on the brink of extinction. The Caribbean corals are turning sickly white from a mysterious disease that calcifies and kills them. This illness is called stony coral tissue loss disease and was first detected near the Florida coast in 2014. Researchers are desperate to understand and fight the disease. The degradation is mainly caused by population growth on islands and the effects of climate change. One prime suspect is poor water quality caused by sewage and a recent surge of decomposing sargassum seaweed. Researchers are currently building up a DNA bank of the endangered corals, hoping they can one day bring them back from the brink of extinction in the wild if needed.
Now in business news, the State Bank of India has downgraded its GDP growth rate forecast to 4.2% in the second quarter. The decision was prompted by New Delhi's growth rate hitting a 6-year low of 5% in its first quarter. In the report, the bank rolled back its forecast for India's current GDP growth from 6.1% to just 5%. Low car sales, the flattening of core sector growth and declining investment in construction has led to the dip. The report said India is also significantly lower in the Economic Uncertainty Index when compared to the rest of the world. India's unemployment rate in October rose to 8.5%, which is its highest in the past 3 years. Well, it's 23 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget, for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Bye-bye.